Hey everybody, how's it going? We're back for another book reading. Jace Beleren. They had walked the length of 10th District Plaza and then walked back again. Chandra still carried the breastplate in her hands, and everywhere they went, Ravnikans of all shapes and sizes, guilds and genders, bowed their heads to honor Gideon Jura. It was right to honor him for what he did and for what he represented. It was Gideon who had held the Gatewatch together. Without him, Jace wasn't sure if the Gatewatch even existed anymore. We'll always be loyal to each other. But to the multiverse? The cost just seemed too high. How can it be? I never noticed that Gideon was my best friend. Vraska was a short distance away conversing with Niv Mizzet and other guild leaders. He didn't envy her or Niv. He was glad his days as the living guild pack were through. "Are we agreed?" Ajani said. "Tomorrow morning, we go to Theros to honor our friend." Jace, Chandra, Nisa, Teferi, Karn, Sahili, Jaya, Ajani, and Huatli all nodded or murmured their assent. Jace wondered briefly why Huatli wanted to go. She'd only met Gideon that morning. But who am I to tell her no? He deserves all the damned honors he can get. He deserves a lot more than that. But I suppose that's all we have left to give him. He glanced up to the top of the citadel where Gideon had died. Died saving Liliana so that Liliana could save the multiverse. With some reluctance, he said, "Listen, I'm worried about Liliana." "You've got to be kidding me," Chandra snapped. "I still don't understand why I shouldn't be hunting her down to kill her for taking kids away from us." Jaya Ballard's look darkened. "Is that who you are, child? A killer?" "I'm not a child, and I've killed plenty." "In cold blood?" Ajani asked. "My blood's not cold on this subject." Teferi rubbed his chin. "I'm still not clear on what happened. Did Liliana Vess take Gideon's life?" "No," Jace said. "Not exactly. At least, I don't believe so." Karn's voice rumbled out. "What do you believe?" "We all saw Liliana turn on Bolus," Jace began. "A day too late," Sahili said. "Thousands died at her hands before that." "Yes," Jace said, "but I can guess why. You all saw it. She was dissolving before our eyes. Turning on the dragon was literally killing her. Yet she was the only one who could possibly stop Bolus. I believe Gideon saw that, realized that." Nisa spoke quietly, more to herself than to the rest. "So he gifted his invulnerability to her, and in exchange took on whatever curse was killing her." "She allowed that?" Chandra asked bitterly. "Maybe. I don't know. What I do know is that I reached out to her, telepathically, after it was all over. I could feel her pain, her conflict, her lack of understanding of her own feelings." "You always had a soft spot for the woman, Jace," Ajani growled. "Really? You think so? Didn't you all accuse me of being too hard on her?" Chandra looked away. She had in fact made that charge against Jace many times. "Maybe you were right about her. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe. But look, I don't relish being her advocate. It's not exactly a job I've trained for. I just think the situation with her may be more complicated than we know. We can't, at least, acknowledge that." Chandra whispered, "I once loved her like a sister, Jace. And she betrayed us all." They were all silent for a time. Jaya was still studying her protégée, Chandra, as she said, "What exactly do you propose, Jace?" "I honestly don't know. Maybe we should try to track her down. At least hear her out. I think she's broken. Chandra looked up at Jace. We can join the club. Jaya took Chandra's hand in hers and said, we don't have to decide anything now. There's nothing to be done tonight. We don't even know where she went. And we have something important to do in the morning. Aye, Ajani said. We can decide what to do about Liliana Vess after the memorial. He looked at Jace. Agreed. Of course. Watley said, perhaps we all just need some rest. Some time to sort things out. The fairy said, not here. Chandra agreed. No, not here. I'm sick to death of Ravnica. You're all welcome to stay with me on Kaladesh. I have somewhere I need to go, Karn stated. The fairy said, somewhere that will still be there tomorrow. I think we could all benefit by staying in each other's company for one night. Karn hesitated, then nodded. To Kaladesh then, Ajani said, just for the night. Out of the corner of his eye, Jace saw Vraska break off from Niv and the rest, beelining straight toward him. I'm gonna stay, he said. Let's meet right back here at dawn, and we'll all planeswalk to Theros together. There were a few more nods, but no other words were spoken. Jace watched them all planeswalk away. Jaya and Chandra disappeared in brief conflagrations of flame. Karn vanished with a sharp metallic sound. Johnny gave off a golden light and was gone. The fairy seemed to transform into a blue whirlwind that swept him away. By the time Nisa, Sahili, and Huatli had departed, Vraska was with him, taking his hand. She said, as I recall, we had a date planned. That's right, Captain. 10 Street, coffee, a bookstore. You like memoirs, reading about interesting people. I do. And you like histories, I think. I do. They started walking. For a time, they were silent, simply glad to be in each other's company. He could tell she had something on her mind, something that troubled her, but she said nothing, and she could not pry, psychically or otherwise. He knew she had her secrets, but was convinced that none of hers could possibly be as big and truly awful as the secret he himself was keeping from her, from everyone. Jace knew he needed to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. For years, he had been hampered, stunted by huge gaps in his memories, which had made him secretive, difficult. Now that he had all his memories back, he wanted to be a better person and hoped he could be that better person with Vraska. He remembered their kiss, their first kiss. After the battle, he stopped suddenly and turned to face her with a questioning look. She seemed to understand and nodded her consent. So cradling her face in his hands, he kissed her again. She tasted so sweet. It was a kiss that eased the burdens on his soul, and he hoped, maybe, the burdens on hers as well. She smiled at him. He smiled back. They started walking again, neither spilling their secrets. After a while, he asked, "Didn't we just pass 10th Street?" "We did," she said. "And yet we're walking this way." "We are," she said. "So no coffee?" "No. We are headed to my quarters, if that's all right with you." He could feel himself blushing. She squeezed his hands in hers, and they walked on. Liliana Vess. Was she trying to ignore them? The ravens. She knew exactly what this ever-gathering conspiracy of birds meant. She knew exactly whom they meant, but she was trying very hard to pretend otherwise. as she continued her increasingly pitiable trek across the Caligo. And the reason why was simple enough. I don't want to see him. Clearly, he didn't much care what she did or didn't want. He never had. More and more ravens began to pursue her. They'd fly ahead, cluster unkindly upon a single tree, occupying every branch, and as she passed, the birds would depart en masse and descend upon the next tree. Only by that time, there'd be still more of them, and more at the next tree, and more at the next. "You're not exactly subtle," she grumbled, knowing he could hear her even if she never spoke the words aloud. It was almost getting ridiculous. In a flurry of black wings, the ravens launched himself, off one tree and descended upon another that could barely bear the weight of them all. Him all. This got her to stop. And the reason why was simple enough. "I'd actually enjoy seeing that tree trunk snap in two, and watching all those damn birds get as drenched and miserable as I am." The tree bent dangerously. The birds cawed nervously, shifting on the branches with their clawed feet. Liliana Vess waited. Then she had an idea. This could be fun. She reached out a hand, and reached out with her magic, pulling the life force from the sagging tree, from its thin trunk and too many branches. The tree died, but she kept going, hoping to make the wood brittle and corrupt. "It's working." It worked. The tree snapped, and the ravens were forced to scatter. But it only took one. A single raven descended, morphing into her second greatest nemesis, the Raven Man. He was just how she remembered him from her childhood. His precisely trimmed white hair and beard, his immaculate, even slightly dated mode of dress, his shining golden eyes. "Still dapper after all these years," she said to him in a tone that belied the compliment. "He isn't just how I remember him. He's exactly how I remember him." An illusion then, or maybe he was a very precise shapeshifter. Either way, she knew that what she saw was no more real, no more him than the birds had been. After all these years, she didn't know what he really looked like, or who he truly was. "I probably don't want to know," he said. "I wish I could return the compliment, but you've never looked worse in my eyes." "I could use a good inn, with the proper amenities. Can you recommend one in the neighborhood?" She was trying to sound like Liliana Vess. "But I'm not pulling it off." He confirmed that for her, with a sad shake of his head, and an expression that clearly was meant to say, "You sound as pathetic as you look." Instead, he said, "I've come to whet your almost blunted purpose. Why do you wallow in self-pity here? You have all the power you ever dreamed of, and now you are free of your demons and the dragon." "But not free of you!" she screamed, suddenly shaking. "No," he confirmed, "but I am not your enemy. I have never been your enemy. All I've ever wanted is to guide you toward becoming the best, truest, and most powerful version of yourself that you may be. I can still do that. I know where to send you next. There's even a nice inn there where you can clean up, feel more like yourself, and all you have to do is listen." "All I have to do is listen? Listen and obey?" Still, it was tempting. She had achieved all her goals, if in the worst possible way. The 4 demons that held the contract on her soul had been slain. The dragon that took over that contract had been reduced to dust. She was free. She was powerful. And although another quick glance at her reflection in the water revealed that, yes, she could definitely use a hot bath, she was still young and beautiful. Most missions accomplished, goals achieved. The obvious drawback being that she had never thought beyond those goals. What do I do now? The Raven Man was once again offering her purpose and direction. He tried to play it off as if he were a benevolent father figure, and she his beholden apprentice. Not like she was a loaded cannon, and he a man taking aim. Whom would he make me hurt this time? That is, whom besides Liliana Vess? She knew that in her current state, she was particularly vulnerable to his machinations and manipulations. She also knew that the Raven Man simply wanted to use her, like the demons had used her, like Bolus had used her. But she knew that the Raven Man had the potential to be worse than her other enemies. Because he was the bastard who started me down this damned path in the first place. Part 6. Rat. The plush robe currently folded in a neat square on her lap was the softest, most elegant item of clothing Araithia Shokta, the rat, had ever been anywhere near. She couldn't stop petting and stroking it, as if she half expected the thing to start purring. Rat was sitting in a preposterously cushy armchair across from a decidedly relaxed Mistress Kaya, who had emerged from her shower, ensconced in a duplicate robe. She sat upon her long folded legs in another armchair and stretched languidly. Rat thought she was one of the most beautiful women she'd ever seen. They were in a tower of Orzova, the cathedral opulent, inside the salon of the Orzov Guildmaster's suite of rooms, which was sumptuous to the point of decadence, to the point of Rat spontaneously gigging every couple minutes or so over having found herself amid such lavishness. Pretty sweet digs for a rat, she murmured. Mistress Kaya murmured back, still languid. Thanks for letting us, stay the night. Oh, of course. You can stay as long as you like. Hearing that, Rat tried not to let her smile fade, for her friend's sake. Presently, a grinning Teo emerged from the lavatory, coming down the hall toward them wrapped in yet another robe, with a towel around his shoulders. His hair was soaking wet and dripping, and he carried a neatly folded pile of his battle-filthy clothes. Pointing back at the room from where he'd emerged, Teo gasped out, "That lavatory is amazing!" "I'm glad you like it," Mistress Kaya said with a smile. "No, you have to understand. That shower is a thing of pure genius. We don't have that on Gobakon. Baths, yes, but showers? Do you know how much sand gets in your everything after a diamond storm? Or even just a small sandstorm, or even just a walk across a dune? Showers would change lives. And the toilet? The big towns like Oasis have those, but they're still this indoor plumbing is still the greatest magic I've ever encountered. Ever!" His enthusiasm was kinda adorable. An amused Mistress Kaya turned to Rat and said, "Your turn." Teo said, "There are clean towels on the shelf for when you're done. A whole pile of them. They're very white and very large and very soft." "Best towels ever?" Rat teased. "I know you're making fun of me," he said, "but yes, best towels ever." She giggled again and walked past him down the long hallway to the lavatory. She went in and closed the door, The ridiculously large bathroom was still steamy from Kaya and Teo's turns. Carefully placing her robe on the closed toilet seat, Rat quickly stripped off her clothes and turned on the water. Teo was easy to please, coming as he did from a seemingly backwater plane, but honestly, a shower like this was a rare luxury for this child of the Gruul clans as well. She reached a cautious hand in under the faucet and found the water was already hot. She was about to step inside when she glanced down at her own unwashed garments, strewn as they were across the floor. She glanced over at the neatly folded robe and thought about the neatly folded clothes in Acolyte Teo's arms and was suddenly embarrassed. As she quickly folded her things and stuck them on a shelf, she mused over how she'd felt embarrassed more times in this one day than she had in all the rest of her years combined. She was already embarrassed in front of her mother, or godfather, and had never felt embarrassed with Hikara. And who else, or what else can embarrass the rat? But around Mistress Kaya, and especially around Teo, she was quickly learning that uncomfortable emotion, yet it felt so normal. She relished it. Araithia had missed out on a lot of normal in her short, odd life, and didn't mind taking the bad with the good. And Mistress Kaya, and especially Teo, made her feel very good. She stepped into the shower and let the water flow over her face and hair. She closed her eyes and soaked in the sensations. She hadn't thought about it until now, but she was sore from all the fighting, and the hot water streaming onto her various muscle groups felt very, very good. She was nervous, however, about taking too long, so she opened her eyes to look for the soap. There are multiple kinds of soap! Alright, yes, she completely understood why this room had so excited Teo. Despite her best mental efforts, she found her thoughts drifting to the coming separation. Teo would return to Gobakon, and Mistress Kaya would depart on her mission to kill Miss Vess, which was a depressing notion on all sorts of levels. Rat wasn't thoroughly convinced that Miss Ravenhair deserved death. On the other hand, Rat wasn't thoroughly convinced, as Teo seemed to be, that she didn't either. In any case, her unformed opinion was decidedly moot, since she couldn't exactly follow Mistress Kaya to wherever Miss Vess was hiding. She couldn't follow Mistress Kaya or Teo anywhere. All she could do was let them go. Let them go, without making a fuss. Suddenly a hand reached in, turned the spigot, and shut the water off. "What is wrong with that boy?" grumbled a woman's voice from just outside the shower stall. "Was he raised in a barn? Who just walks out and leaves the water running like this?" Wiping the soap from her eyes, Rat peeked out and saw Madame Blaze, chief servitor to the Orzhov guildmaster, picking up her pile of clothes and gripping. "And those? Whose are these? They're all twisted with vines. How am I supposed to clean this?" She sighed heavily and walked out with Rat's things, leaving the door to the bathroom wide open. Rat never even thought about saying anything to the servitor. She heaved her own heavy sigh, waited until she heard Madame Blaze's footsteps tread far enough down the hall, and then turned the water back on briefly to quickly rinse all the soap from herself. The fact that the door was wide open wouldn't have bothered her normally, but Teo was loose in the suite, so she quickly grabbed the robe, which was thankfully still on the toilet seat, and threw it on a soaking wet. Only afterward did she close and lock the door, take the robe off again, and towel herself dry. She emerged a couple minutes later, dressed in the now damp robe, and not feeling quite as enthralled by the lavatory as Teo was, or as she had been previously. Going down the hallway, she could hear Mistress Kaya and Teo attempting to explain things to Madame Blaze. "I promise you, Madame, I did not leave the water running. That was Rat." I promise you, young master, we have no rats in the cathedral opulent, and certainly none that can turn on a faucet. No, no. See, Rat padded into the salon as Mistress Kaya said, Madame Blaze, our friend Rat, our human friend Rat, was taking a shower. There was no one in the shower, mistress. I checked. For fun, Rat walked right in front of Madame Blaze and offered up a little wave, which of course the woman couldn't see. Rat looked over at Mistress Kaya, and the two shared a grin. Then she glanced over at Teo, who was staring at her, and swallowing and pulling his robe more tightly around himself. He was blushing, and Rat's face felt hot too. She pulled her robe tightly around herself. As she had done, she felt a little better, but he was struggling with some difficulty to look at absolutely anything in the room except Rat. It got her thinking, does he think I'm pretty? Me? With my big teeth, and my rat face, and my stupid crazy hair that I have to cut myself? No, that can't be right. He's just kind enough to be embarrassed for me. Mistress Kaya was saying, Rat lives with a unique condition that renders her invisible. Madame Blaze eyed her mistress with a little suspicion. Mistress is entitled to her whimsies, but there is no need to weave tales or play tricks on a faithful servant in order to make her look foolish. Kaya laughed. I swear to you, Blaze, I'm perfectly sincere, perfectly serious. Our Rat has lived her entire life under an admittedly bizarre curse of insignificance, Rat prompted. Curse of insignificance, yes. Thank you, Rat. This curse makes her invisible, even unhearable, to nearly anyone. Teo and I are two of only 4 people who can see her naturally. Madame Blaze looked appalled. Why, that's awful. The poor girl? She asked, unsure. Yes, Rat is a girl, or young woman, about 16 summers, Rat said, or 16 winters, 16 springs, or autumns too, I guess. She's 16, Mistress Kaya said. And she's been this way since birth? The kind-hearted servitor said, wiping a tear from her eye. Yes, Kaya said, her tone falling to match Madame's. It's not that bad, Rat said. It's just my life. We've all got whatever we deal with. This is mine. Oh, please, mistress. Don't cry. Kaya sniffed and wiped away a couple of tears of her own, murmuring, I'm not. But she kind of was. Teo, sounding desperate to help, said, We've found that a few people can learn to see Rat if they're told exactly where she is, and they concentrate on the spot. Madame Blaze straightened up, even straightened her uniform, before stating, Then I will be one of those people. Where is the dear? Mistress Kaya put an arm around Rat's shoulder and said, She's right here under my arm. The servitor leaned forward and stared, squinted, strained. Finally, with a sigh, she stepped back and shook her head. I'm sorry. I just don't see her. It can take practice, Rat said, shrugging. Rat says it can take practice, Mistress Kaya repeated for Madame Blaze's benefit. Well, then I will practice, but for the time being, now that I know the poor thing exists, I will make allowances. To begin with, she held up the neat pile of Rat's clothes. I will clean her clothes. I have a perfect spell for that. They'll be done in less than a minute, once I extract all this foliage. Rat quickly spoke to Kaya. Please, tell her not to remove my vine belt. It was a gift from my godfather. He knows I get hungry sometimes, and I like to nibble on the berries that grow on it. Mistress Kaya relayed the message. Madame Blaze raised the folded clothes up very close to her face to examine the belt. I see, she said. Celestian magic. How clever. Well, I still wouldn't have her eat these berries without giving them a good washing first. But I can manage that without harming them, I believe. Give me just a few minutes. I'll bring these clothes right back, and all three of you can change for dinner. Oh, and I will set an extra plate in the dining room for Mistress Rat.